Back then, interviews weren't as long too
Yeah.
as well. The process wasn't as long. Chances are you met one or two people and then you were hired. Now the interview processes are somewhat longer, but they're done for a reason too as well. You want to make sure that you get an opportunity to meet different people. Sometimes people could be in a situation, but it doesn't really represent who they are and what they do. I try to connect people with roles and opportunities that speak to them. If you want to work in Latin America and certain places, certain schools, certain tech hubs, certain organizations that are on the come up that we should be looking for talent, then I want to align you with that.
This week, I had the absolute pleasure to be joined by Len Syriaque, who is a talent acquisition expert and has been in the trade for over 20 years. So he started back in the 90s as an executive recruiter, and since then has risen the ranks of talent acquisition and has gained a lot of wisdom and experience along the way. And that is what he shares with us today. I think as well with the timing of this episode, so it's a tough time for a lot of people in TA. There's a lot of layoffs, there's a lot of change. And it was great to speak to Len, to someone who's been through a few cycles already, and for him to basically give his guidance on what makes a great recruiter and what skills stand the test of time, and also how we need to adapt in the next decade as a TA function and as recruiters. I loved speaking with Len. He's one of the best orators I've had on the podcast in a long, long time. The way he puts himself across is brilliant, and the way he tells his story, which is what this podcast is all about, I absolutely loved as well. So, without further ado, I'm Alex Bloisey, and this is the Building Our World podcast. And there we go. Another year. Happy New Year, Len. And the first recording of this new year, 2023. It's been an interesting time. So thank you so much for agreeing to come on. I think if we just start, we go right back to the good old days, right back to the beginning. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you've been in recruitment and talent acquisition for many, many years, and
Yes.
and there's so much that I'd love to dig into. And I know there's a lot of wisdom that you can share. But first, let's just give a bit of context for everyone. So, how did you start out, and how did it progress over the years?
Yeah, I got into, well, first of all, Alex, thank you for this opportunity. I'm very excited, to be part of this. But as far as my career, starting out, in recruitment, and I would definitely say it wasn't by accident, but coming out of college, recruitment and HR wasn't something that was top of mind for me. I wanted to get into, I knew I wanted to get into finance. So I started as a stockbroker trainee, and that job went downhill fast for me. It just wasn't something that I wanted to do. As far as cold calling people, and pitching, stocks or finances to them at that time. So I picked up the newspaper, and I saw an opportunity at an agency, and I went to that agency, and it just so happens is that the people who put the posting out there went to college with me previously. And the reason why they called me was because they saw that I went to the same college, and they pitched this opportunity for me as far as being an executive recruiter. And I didn't really know what it entailed. They told me if you had that experience as a stockbroker trainee, you're calling people, you're pitching ideas to them, and you're trying to capture their attention within a certain amount of time. It's the same concept, but it's much more of a job as opposed to a stock. So I jumped into it, and I loved it. It was an opportunity for me to connect with people and provide opportunities for them. Equally. So the interesting thing about it, that was like the late 90s. I started doing that, and when I did that, we didn't have any computers. There were no laptops. It was just the telephone and a call sheet. So you just sat down and you just continuously dialed and called people, pitched ideas to them. And what was interesting about it back then was that people would have their resumes on them, hard copy resumes that they would fax over to you. And then you would refax it back to the client, and pitch their skills. But this was all done over the telephone. There was no email at
Yeah.
that time. So and then gradually, things started to evolve. I went my first corporate job in HR was with Thompson Financial, and I was the technical recruiter for their financial team at that time. So that's when things really started to get a little more regular. At that point, Monster Book was the
Mm.
biggest candidate portal at that time. This was before LinkedIn. So we used that heavily. And then eventually, gradually, I worked for other investment firms. I worked for, commercial banking, and then eventually got, into fintech, years later. But, I've seen a lot of different transitions, you know, as far as, what candidates are looking for, what organizations are looking for, and the overall market too, as well. Things have evolved.
Mm.
I can't say for the better or for the worse, but things have evolved and what people are looking for and what organizations are looking for. But it's been an interesting journey, along the way. I can't put a finger on it as to how many people I've hired, within the past 20 years or so. But it's been a lot, and I know some of them have actually come back to me, and I think there have been a few people that I've placed at different organizations,
Yeah.
a few times,
Mm.
which has been good. The thing about recruitment is that you always have to build today for tomorrow. Even if you don't place someone today, you have that make that contact, make that understanding of who they are and what they do, and place it in your dossier, for some time later.
Mm.
That's a skill that I've always, built upon, and it served me well,
Yeah.
too, as well. And that's it.
I think that's great advice for people new to the industry as well, because
Mhm.
whether you're on its side of the recruiting fence, external or internal, you want to make
Mhm.
that hire quickly. You want to get that client on quickly. But sometimes, it's just a not right now. You book it and leave it for future months. Do you remember your first placement until all those years ago?
Um, my first placement was with Pershing at the time, and it was with a position called people. It was more on the. It was an operational position. They used to call it R&D. So these are people who were working on mortgage-backed securities, and they worked in what they called back then was the cage.
Mm.
So you would call these people, and what they were doing was basically, processing and storing the securities, in different formats manually. This was now I'm going to say this is before computers back then. So that's the best I can remember about those particular roles. But it was pretty cut and dry, back then. And it was either you've been doing this job for a while. Here's another opportunity at another firm doing the same thing. It was probably maybe about paying about 40 to 50 thousand dollars, back then, and that was probably big for someone in that operational function, at that time.
Mm.
Hmm.
Since then, obviously, working culture has shifted massively.
Yep.
And I mean, I remember did a podcast last year
Hmm.
with a TA person, but this was then in the sort of the height of the boom and the real candidate shortage.
Hmm.
And I wanted to get your take on it. Do employees now and candidates in interview process expect more from companies than maybe they're used to? And please correct me on this, but maybe back in the 90s or the early 2000s, there was like there was a hierarchy. You were the candidate, and
Yeah.
you would do anything to get that job, and there was a real power uh,
Yeah.
imbalance there.
Yeah.
I think that definitely changed, sort of, especially last year.
Mhm.
But just in terms of a general culture shift, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's been a definite shift, in the candidate employer, relationship. I think now candidates are more aligned with work life balance, and understanding what their needs and how they can translate those needs, to a career, too, as well. Back then, when I first started recruiting, it was all right. Here's how much you're going to get paid. There was no, remote working
Mm.
situation. There were credit checks, done on people. There were criminal checks. There were you had to take a drug test. And some companies had spot drug tests too as
Wow.
well. Too as well. But I think now, people have a little more independence in what they do. It's much more of a work-life balance. You want to work with an organization that's aligned with your values and your goals. You want to make sure the benefits are aligned with you too as well. You want to make sure that there's equity. You want to make sure that
Mm.
there's a bonus. You want to understand how you're aligned with other employees within the organization. Back then, we didn't get those questions. It was basically, can I get the interview, and how much does the job pay? And also back then, interviews weren't as long too
Yeah.
as well. The process wasn't as long. Chances are you met one or two people and then you were hired. Now the interview processes are somewhat longer, but they're done for a reason too as well. You want to make sure that you get an opportunity to meet different people, different cohorts in your team, and understand, how these people have evolved, in their positions and how they deal with the overall culture. And that's another thing too as well. Back then, people accepted the culture that was given to them,
Yeah.
within these organizations. There weren't ERGs, there weren't diversity, groups out there. It was either this is the culture, you fit into the culture, or you don't fit into the culture. I think now, companies and employees see that, they can change the culture. They can come into an organization and propose a new ERG. They can work on a philanthropy, project that aligns with their organization. So I think things have somewhat changed, for the
Mm.
better,
Yeah.
because now, we're aligning things with what we like. And companies, you can keep an employee longer that way too
Mm.
as well. And companies will begin to evolve, in different ways too as well.
Mm. But with that all being said, then,
Mhm.
is it harder to hire now as a result compared to now, or is it just different?
I don't think you can make the comparison. Is it harder to hire? I just think it's different. The expectations on both sides are different. As far as organizations. When I talked about the interview process being longer now, but also candidates are asking more questions, more personal questions, than technical questions. For organizations. Well, the I would say the candidates that do the work are asking those questions. Because you're always going to get two sets. You're going to get candidates that look at a job description. If it says software engineer, all right, I'm a software engineer, and I speak to them. I said, well, what do you know about the organization? Well, I don't know anything, but it's a software engineer job, and I think I could work the job.
Yeah.
And then you're going to get people who are going to say, well, I read about your values, and I like this, that, and the other thing, and I saw the benefits, and I spoke to some of your employees, and those are the people that do well in the interview process. And on my side, as an interviewer, I have to keep those people engaged. It's not so much, do you know iOS? Do you know Kotlin? Do you know Swift? But, how do you know it? How have you applied it? And what's the difference between what you're doing now and what you're looking to do with us too as well? What are you looking to gain?
Mm.
From this new opportunity that you're working here with us. So it's that understanding. I think back in the days, people were trying to plug a body into
Yeah.
certain places, because without technology, it was just basically, follow these particular rules and you'll be okay.
Mm.
Put this file here, put this file there, talk to this person, you're good. But now, you have to put a little more work into it when it comes to, technical hires. You have to know how to code. You have to know that particular program, to do the job well. So, there are different variances.
Mm. So
Mhm.
do you think as a result of that, because I mean the phrase sort of talent acquisition from what I gather wasn't really a thing. It was like HR and recruitment back in the day.
Correct.
And then as there were these, as you said, it gets more complicated, people expect more from processes and take more into consideration. There was this whole function that really, I don't know, since like 2010 or something, or in the last sort of 10, 12 years, has
Mhm.
really evolved. And now there's like a million aspects of it,
Correct.
strategy, ops, employer branding.
Correct.
Um,
Correct.
I mean, how have you seen that evolve? You know, especially maybe over the last 10 years.
Well, I think the key thing to understand is information. Now there's a lot of information available, to the public, as to, how companies do things. You can go on LinkedIn, and get into a rabbit hole of information. You can go onto Glassdoor, Fishbowl, and see what employees are saying about organizations. So I think the more information we know, as far as, if you're a candidate, the more information a candidate knows, the more inclined they're going to ask these different questions, to as well about an opportunity. Remote learning, remote working. There are so many things that are available to people now that weren't. So it makes the interview process longer. There are more questions, and there are a lot of more things that people want to be, in the know about than they were previously,
Mm.
too, as well. And I think that's good. I think that's good. They always say you want an educated customer.
Yeah.
You want someone who asks questions. You want someone who's going to somewhat challenge, the status quo, too, as well. And the focus now is diversity. And not only diversity of race, but diversity of thought.
Yeah.
Where are we getting people from? And where are those people coming? How can we develop more people, with a certain skill set? Um, and then, there's a flip side to that too, as well. You don't want to continuously create a template of employees. You want employees that can come in and, push the level of experience, push the level of technology, push the level of thought, product, services, to the next level. What you did last year, you can't do again this year.
Mm.
You need forward thinking employees, principled thinkers,
Yeah.
people with a strong bias to action, to get things done.
Yeah. It's interesting what you say about diversity. I think for the first time in the last few years, companies and people have realized that you need people with different experiences, different outlooks on the world. And
Yes,
it brings so much value to an organization. I mean,
definitely.
I see it myself with my hiring for my recruitment company, and it's difficult for me because if I'm sort of messaging people on LinkedIn, I think
Hmm.
naturally I might attract people similar profile and background to myself because
Hmm.
there's that sort of instant they kind of understand each other, and
Hmm.
by getting different people within the organization, it can open so many doors in your organization, but also you can attract a much wider pool of candidates that can add so much value.
Yes, yes, and I think, in recruitment, it's also important that you take some time to speak to people, not necessarily a fit for the role sometimes, but just speak to people in general, just to, get an understanding of what they're doing in their environment. Because, there's always something important that you can take from that conversation. What you were talking about, going back to diversity, you know, recruiting is never something that, if you got a great hire through a strategy that you used before. You posted on LinkedIn, somebody sent you their resume, boom, boom. You're like, oh, wow, this is great. I'm going to do it again. It
Mm,
never works. It never works
no,
again at the same time. You always have to think out of the box. It's diving a little deeper, into people's backgrounds. And LinkedIn is very useful, but it's not the overall,
no,
because it's only as good as how people build their profiles. Some people just put a title. Some people, put more actionable, insights to what they do as far as data driven. They'll tell you the projects they worked on. They'll tell you the tech stacks, and that's very helpful. And you can build from there. And some people don't. But sometimes, it's a gut feeling. Getting into there, having a conversation with someone, and just building that relationship, going through.
mm. I think the same as well for if you hire someone who's really, really good,
Mhm.
people want to go out and get the exact same person, same sort of
Exactly.
background, degree, and whatever. And again, I think that's a mistake as well. You can get a very one
There
dimensional
you go.
company that way.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and I think the thing around that, um, one of the things I try to do is create candidate personas.
Mm,
Data is very important too as well. Right now, in recruitment, and that's not something that we really had, back in the late '90s. Understanding, where candidates are coming from, where they worked, what schools they went to, and trying to see some correlations, between that. Obviously, you don't want, as I said before, you don't want to create a template. You don't want a robot,
yeah.
but you actually kind of want to get a basis of, where they're coming from. And, there might be another person in that group. They might not have the same skill set, might not have the same thought, but they can guide you in the right direction, too,
Mm,
as well. You can build off of that person. In technical recruiting, I'm pretty sure, as you found, sometimes people are good technically, but they're not good functionally. And
mm,
sometimes people are good functionally, but they're not good technically too as well.
yeah.
But that doesn't mean both of those personas cannot be a good candidate. They can be good for their own reasons too as well. You can train one up, on the functional aspects, or you can train one up on the technical aspects too as well. So it's being open, to people's goals and their alignment with what you're trying to do.
Mm. One thing I learned very quickly in technical recruitment, recruiting software engineers when I first started, I just thought it
Mhm.
was a case of getting the best engineer, that coding wizard, and they could just get a job anywhere. And obviously, there's an aspect to that, but
Mhm.
the more I do it as the years go on, that soft skill aspect, especially in software engineering and other roles as well,
Yeah,
is so important, and
it is.
something that I think that a lot of technical recruiters probably need to focus on more,
Yes,
because there's always been this kind of you know stereotype of you just find that coding wizard, that genius, that engineer,
exactly.
but there's so much
Exactly.
more to it.
Exactly. And I think right now, one of the big things is that, people in the technical recruiting aspect, you want to go after the FANG,
Yeah.
candidates. And then sometimes you'll interview some of these FANG candidates and you're like, wow, how did you get into this role? Because I can't figure it out. It's like, so you have to know that, sometimes people could be in a situation, but it doesn't really represent who they are and what
Mm.
they do. I usually like to try to go up to the startups,
Yeah.
those startups, and find those people, who've excelled in a smaller environment, because those people are doing more things. They're doing the technical aspects, they're speaking, they're building, they're scaling, they're doing everything from soup to nuts. So you'll find out that those people sometimes have a bigger ambition than those people who are part of a Twitter, where you're just one part of that big team,
Mm.
as opposed to, a big fish in a small pond. So there's different aspects to it. But as I said, you have to kind of understand what you need and move forward,
Yeah.
too as well. So it's understanding both sides of,
Mm.
of knowing the job and knowing what person will be a best fit for that job.
Mm. I wonder in the next years, because obviously said we focused on those big company, those FANG engineers, and I almost feel like this past like 6-9 months, I think is almost like a changing of the guard, where there's now going to be that next phase of whatever it is,
Yes.
and everything has their eras, I suppose, and
Yeah.
cycles, and maybe as the years go on, we'll look at different stuff as the
Yeah.
because
I,
it's
you know, I,
basically been the same for the past 10
yeah.
years.
I see what's going on right now as kind of like a refresh.
Mm,
We're refreshing, what makes sense, what we need, and what's going to work too as well. We're at we're at an uncharted part of technology, of finance, of revenue, and it's not. This is global too as well. But what I'm seeing, if you look at a lot of these firms and then a lot of these startups, that are going out of business, they're very similar. Everyone, for instance, if you take a Uber and a Lyft, it's the same concept, but it's a different. They try to put a different twist to it.
yeah.
If you look at Netflix and Disney, it's the same conflict. it's the same concept to a certain degree, but they put a different twist, to it. And they need the same people. They need people who are working on the back end, on the front end. The only difference is, the technology that they're using, or maybe the culture,
Mm.
internally. But as far as skill level, we're all looking for the same people to do the same thing over and over again. I don't know what the outcome is going to be on the
Mm.
other side, but and then you have all these other companies that come in, locally. If you look at payment services, there's so many different payment services out there. Stripe, Venmo, Cash App, they all do the same thing.
Mm.
But you have another company that comes out and tries to take a little piece of that market too as well. I was reading a book not too long ago, and they said, there are no new ideas, and what we need is a new idea,
Yeah.
out there in the market. There's nothing new under the sun. People are just taking different things and tweaking it, and trying to add a different twist to it. But another thing we have to keep in mind too as well is AI. AI is
Yeah.
coming. Well, it's not coming; it's already here. So how do we incorporate that into our day to
Yeah.
day, and how do we move on from that? How do
Yeah.
we negotiate with AI right now?
Mm. Yeah, because when I look at like the next big shift, I know you sent me that link of all the different AI tools for I mean, unbelievable
Yeah,
what you can do. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, these kind of everyone talks about these, the Ubers, the Airbnbs, the Facebooks that kind of come out of nowhere, and yeah, I think you're right where you can't kind of really kind of what's the word, you can't sort of say like, right, let's sit down and make the next $1 trillion company that's going to dominate for the next 10 years. I don't think
mhm,
really anyone sets out to do that. And if you look at like the big ones like Facebook and things like that, they ride a wave, and there's that like technology that sort of facilitates that as well. So we had smartphones with apps, and
yes,
we could do that. And I look at AI now, and obviously there's a lot of hype around chat GPT and everything like that, and obviously
mhm,
blockchain as well has many use cases. And
mhm,
I just think, yeah, maybe in the next couple of years there's going to be some force that comes out of nowhere, this whole industry,
yes.
and it's going to really be, set the scene for the next decade.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm not sure what it is,
Mm.
but
If we did, we'd be very rich.
exactly, exactly. But I think that we have to be open to it. When I think about just going back to recruitment, starting back in the days in the late '90s, I don't think we never, when we tried to integrate using laptops and computers, into what we were doing. It was like we had one computer in the office, and everybody just took their time, trying to understand how to best use it. You know, so I think it's something like that. Just
Yeah.
being open to opportunities, and being ready to see how it can be useful, to
Mm.
us in our environment right now.
Were there people back in the day when laptops and the internet was taking off that were resistant, and I mean, recruiters that still wanted to fax CVs because that was the proper way?
Exactly.
Do you still get that back then?
Well, I think for me too as well. I got to keep changing my mindset, on different things too as well. When I think about that, because for instance, one of the things I've been thinking about is how do you approach a candidate, right? Because there used to be a certain way to do things. You only sent emails, from 9 to 5. Now people are sending texts, about opportunities.
Yeah.
And I don't, for me, if someone were to send me a text about a job, I'd be kind of skeptical. I'd be like, where's this coming from? So I think you have to kind of be open to it, and how things come to you. The same thing with email. Back then, when they introduced email, not everybody had an email. So what was the use of using email if not everyone had an email?
Mm.
On Monster Board, the same thing too as well. You know, if not everyone had a computer, then you couldn't really search for resumes
Yeah.
on Monster Board because there were no resumes, to find out there. So it's waiting for things to evolve. You mentioned blockchain. One of the things I can see, coming to fruition in the next couple of years is using resumes as NFTs,
Mm,
because that'll be a great way to validate experience, with people.
yeah.
But obviously there's a lot more work that needs to go there. But, if you can validate someone's experience, at an organization, and that they're good at, coding, let's say in Java, and you need a good Java coder, you go in there, you see that validation on that NFT, and it's been validated, 6 months ago, and that person is current, then, that's a process I think that will, kind of eliminate, people's resumes where you see that there's 10 pages on that resume and they have every other tech stack listed on
Yeah,
it.
that's red flag.
Yeah. And then you pick that tech stack and they said, well, I did that 5 years ago and it was somebody who was sitting next to me and I assisted them. And you say, well, then why did you put it on your resume if it's not relevant, to right now? But I think, having those validations, will make things, that much more level playing here, for us. And it'll save us recruiters and organizations much more time when we're evaluating people
Yeah,
too as well.
yeah, absolutely. The possibilities, as I said, with these new technologies are absolutely endless, and yeah, it'll be up to the next generation to get those use cases
Yeah,
ahead. Um,
definitely.
what I wanted to really talk about as well is because you've obviously been in the game for a while, you've done it, but you've also worked alongside, and I'm guessing you've managed a lot of
Yes.
TA people, recruiters, whatever you want to call them,
Hmm.
and it's a funny old profession, I think, and I see it. I recognize it more when I'm hiring for my team.
Yeah.
There literally is not much on a profile or a CV that can tell you if someone will be good at the job.
Yeah.
It's so you have to jump on the call with them, really.
Yes.
Um, so, I mean, from your time working with all these different people, are there
Mhm.
any sort of common traits that come up time and time again for the successful recruiters you've worked with?
Yeah. I think, successful recruiters, in recruiting, and, you can back me up on this one. You got to be a people person.
Mm,
If you're not a people person, if you don't have empathy, you can't, being a recruiter in talent acquisition is not going to work for you too as well. Because, you faking empathy is going to show on the other side
yeah,
too as well. You have to be able to make that contact with individuals, get them on your side and basically let them understand, what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to get out of them too as well. Because a lot of times you're speaking to people, they're going to be nervous, and you need to maximize the time that you have with them. So you need to bring out, the best out of them as far as getting the right questions and getting an understanding of, what you're trying to accomplish with this conversation. And,
yeah,
in the people that I've hired and the people that I've managed, I've always tried to find that component with them too as well. Can you, speak to someone? Can you evaluate, their needs? And also, I think I'm somewhat of a outlier, when you look at, talent acquisition, because a lot of people generally move out of talent acquisition, after a few years and do other things in HR. But, I stuck with it. I don't, HR, you can do talent management, you can do DI, you can do payroll, but I never really was interested in those types of things. I always felt that I was best as far as talking to people and understanding their needs. So, when I interview, recruiters, I always want to know what other things they like to do too as
yeah,
well, and try to incorporate that in their job too as well. Because my mindset is that eventually you're going to leave and do that thing, right? Or you need to break up the monotony. You don't want to talk to people of the day. Maybe there's a project you want to work on. Maybe it's more data focused. Maybe you want to work more on payroll. Maybe you want to do compensation. So I'm always trying to figure out, what's the other part of your agenda that I can give you in your current role. But I think the core part of it is being able to talk to people.
yeah.
You
Mm.
know, if you can't talk to someone, if you can be an introvert and jump out and talk to people, but go back into your shell. But you have to be able to do that effectively.
Mm. Yeah, it's amazing what you say about empathy. That That is so important. And that just in a conversation, when you're just, say, if you're interviewing someone and you're framing the interview, you know,
Yeah.
you tell them, you know, what the steps are going to be, you know, what we're getting out of the conversation. And just like little touches, I've found that, you know, for example, you know, I appreciate you've probably got a lot of interviews on, and, you know, you're working as well. So, you know, we'll try and keep this short and get as much out of it for you as possible. And just those little touches, those touch points along
Yes.
the way. And I remember when I first started in recruitment, you know, one of the trainers said, you know, people don't remember what you say, but, you know, they remember how you made them feel.
Yes.
And never has that been truer than when you're in hiring.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, and honesty
Mm,
too as
yeah,
well. You know, obviously, you know, if someone's taking the time to speak to you for an opportunity, they want to know, how do they match up, you know, with the opportunity? You know, what's the next steps? You know, when do you get back to that person? Are you getting back to that person? And then even in some instances, you can have a conversation with someone and just determine in the first 5 minutes that this role is not for you.
yeah,
You know, so you have to be able to basically, you know, steer the conversation. You know, I'm talking to you about, you know, an opportunity, and it seems like you are not a fit for this opportunity. You know, I have
yeah,
to jump in and say, well, this is what we're really looking for. And from what I'm seeing right now, it's not a fit here. And I'm going to tell you why
yeah,
too as well. And if you shake your head and say, yeah, I understand, then I've done my job.
yeah,
you know, and then, you know, I'll refer you, I'll keep you in mind for different opportunities. And I've done that, you know, many times. And, you know, sometimes you'll get a referral, you know, from someone that they know who might be a better fit for that particular role once they understand those needs. So, you know, you know, I think back in the days, and depending on what you're doing in recruiting, sometimes it's a numbers game, you know, because
hmm
you got to talk to somebody. And if that person's not right, hang up the phone. Next person. Oh, you good? You're not good. All right, boom, boom. You move that person. But I think if you really take the time out, you know, and plan your day and plan your schedule appropriately, you can get, you know, the best outcome from someone who is not a fit too as well. Because you'll learn a lot of different things, and you know you'll lay some tracks there too as well. So I think that's just important, just as important.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely, I agree. Um, that sort of feedback and that honesty, you know, goes a huge, huge long way.
Yeah.
I wanted to move on as well to how you look to manage a team of recruiters,
Mhm.
and talent teams. So, I mean, I'm guessing you, from what I could gather, you still quite like to, you know, keep your hands dirty and
Yeah.
still do the recruiting side and speak to people. Um, so, in terms of like a function, if we sort of look at more of a top down, what
Mhm.
do you think is like the optimal talent acquisition team in terms of, say, recruiter loads, and how would you structure their days, and the team in general for, you know, a really successful hiring campaign?
Well, you know, I think, you know, when you look at that, you know, are you speaking solely as far as generalist recruiters or recruiters towards specific?
I'd say,
Um,
your example. So I'm guessing tech, so more specialized. I think most talent teams now are quite specialized.
yeah, yeah. You know, I would look at it this way. You know, right now where I'm at, you know, we're much more of a global organization. You know, so looking at that too as well. You know, because when I go back and I'm thinking about, you know, alignments and goals. You know, there are certain things that, you know, if you're working with a recruiter in Latin America, that they can connect with a candidate that I can't,
Yeah,
you know, as far as, you know, where to go, what to say, experiences, you know, that they can relate to. So, you know, I try to connect people with roles and opportunities that speak to them too as well. You know, if you want to work in Latin America and you know certain places, certain schools, certain tech hubs, certain organizations that are on the come up that we should be looking for talent, then I want to align you with that. As far as workload, I don't think recruiters should be working on anything more than 10 rec, then excuse me, 20 recs,
yeah,
you know, at a time. Obviously, you also have to manage, you know, what the ETA on those recs are. And oftentimes, some of those recs are going to be the same. You know, you might need, you know, 4 or 5, you know, back end engineers working on the same type. but for different teams, different verticals. Same thing as front end, maybe mobile engineers too as well. So understanding, that you can group these people. The same thing in North America, the same thing, in Europe. Just having people who are on the ground, understanding, where they can find those diverse candidates.
Yeah,
Where are those meetups? Who are, some of the people that they can attach to. And certain times, if we need external help, what agencies, can provide us, with, better traction to speak to these candidates. Because obviously there's a lot of, third party agencies out there, but they're all not on the same level,
no,
as far as representation and processes. So, that's important. I don't pretend to know everything, but you need someone who can guide you and provide, that access um, to you. And
absolutely.
sometimes if that person, so to speak, speaks that person's language, it's you can open the door quicker, in that sense.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up as well, I wanted to, what I try and do with this podcast as well, we try and get
Mhm,
into the nitty gritty of particular sector someone's in. So in your talent acquisition, but I love to just get to know a bit about the person as well.
mhm,
It's clear, obviously, you've done a heck of a lot in your career. You've risen the ranks. I know you're a family man as well. So,
mhm.
what has sort of driven you to where you are today in terms of, has this all sort of come naturally to you? Have you really wanted to work hard and get to where you wanted to be? And what does this all mean for you?
Um, I would say balance. I think, in anyone's life, you go to certain stages. When you first start out, you're young, you don't have a family, then you get a family. Now it's, raising that family, trying to find that balance as far as raising your kids, being with your wife, going on vacation, but also, work too as well. Being able to find and, produce, in your job. Um, for me right now, it's more so of that balance, understanding, where can I add value? Where can I add, impact to as well? And how can I help people on both sides, not only with my employer, but the people that I'm talking to, right now. Um, and what I've learned too as well, I think the biggest thing that I've learned, in my career is, you know, leave your ego at the door.
Hmm.
A lot of times you could do things because you feel a certain way, that you have to assert a certain power, that you have to have, a certain title, for people to respect you, or go forward. And what I found out is that, sometimes that stuff is, no one's really thinking about that, in certain instances. No one really cares if you're a VP, if you're a senior this or you're senior that. What they really care is how you treat them.
Hmm.
What can you add to that situation too as well. So when you're not trying to, to project, a certain image and you're just yourself, you can go further. And what I tell my kids, my kids are, are grown now, is that, I also tell, friends, who talk about, looking for opportunities. If you can't be yourself at work, it'll never work
Hmm.
too as well, because you're always switching from one personality to the next. If you can't be yourself, then it's not going to work. So I'm always trying to find an opportunity, to find a space where I could just be Leonard. I could wake up in the morning, be Leonard, come to work, be Leonard, go home, be Leonard. That way I don't have to guess what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm balanced. I can do this at work, I can do this at home.
Hmm.
So that, that's part of my journey. That's what I've learned, and that's what I try to tell people. Who asks me, what's the best way, to look for opportunities.
Hmm.
Find balance.
Hmm. Sounds like the dream, the absolute dream.
Yeah, yeah.
Before we finish up as well,
Mhm,
I think we should address obviously the current market when it comes to especially talent acquisition. So we're recording this 13th of Jan, and
mhm,
start of the year there's been a lot of layoffs, especially TA, and obviously there was a lot end of last year. companies right now are looking at their cash and their spend for the year, and they're taking action that they think is right. You've obviously been through a couple of recessions, I think,
Yes. Yeah.
and you've come out the other side.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't know if maybe you could offer some advice or some solace to, because there's a lot of young people that have been laid off that are experiencing their first proper downturn and recession or
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had any thoughts or wisdom for them, someone who's been through a lot.
Well, I think, as you said, I've been through a lot of ups and downs as far as recessions. I've seen a lot of things. I think one of the major things is that you got to stay in the game. And what I mean by that is that, if you got to lay off, continuously keep learning, keep yourself fresh, follow the same routines, that you've had before, because it's physics. A body in motion is going to continuously be in motion. But if you're laid off and you say, all right, I'm going to take a full month off and just sit down and vegetate, it's going to be hard for you to restart that engine, and look for opportunities out there, and I go back to that, what I said before, it's about balance, understanding that balance. Now, I'm not saying that when you get laid off, just keep charging forward the next day and, put your suit on and sit down in front of the computer. You need time to realize what has happened to you. Take that time for yourself, but, measure that time, understand, all right, I need time to reflect. I need time to grieve, but then I need time to move forward too as well. But you should, definitely have a plan, out there. Reach out to people, stay active, go out, take a walk. Don't sit in a dark room all
Mm.
day. Just be active, get your name out there, and you'll see that, things will change for you. And then think about, career changes too as well. Maybe there's another opportunity in another place for you, doing something else too as well. But just be open. And I think that's a very important thing, to do. Just be open, journal, log, keep reminding yourself of these things. I think, we as people, sometimes we get caught up in routines,
Mm.
And once that routine is taken away from you, it's kind of hard to reimagine yourself doing different things, but you kind of have to reprogram yourself, you know, speak to someone, get things going again. There's no rudimentary way to get back into work. No one's going to get a job the same way they got the job the last time, but keep trying to find different ways to reinvent yourself.
Mm.
Take that time out, see what you did well at that job, see what you didn't do well at that job too, as well, and try to make amends for that, in that next role that you're looking for.
Mm. Never was a truer word spoken.
Yeah.
And back to yourself, what does the future hold for you? Where do you see the next few years or whatever you wanted to do? I know it's the classic, where do you see yourself in 5 years? But
Yeah.
how does the future look?
You know what? I can't give you a day to day, but I'll just tell you this: I'll be at peace. Whatever I'm doing, I'll be at peace. That's it. That's the best I can hope for. Just to be at peace.
Perfect. Well, Len,
Yeah.
it's been an absolute pleasure.
You as well, Alex.
You've inspired, motivated, given your wisdom out, and it's been great to hear your story in the space, over the last sort of 20 almost 20 years. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for that.
Thank you too
It's
as
a
well.
real pleasure.
Thank you for this platform, and have a great year, and I hope we can stay in touch.
Absolutely.